morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the research series in human-animal relationships of the University of Arizona's College for Veterinary Medicine. My name is Martin Reimann. I'm a faculty member at the college, and I have the pleasure of directing our research series. Just very briefly, founded a few years ago, the research series on human-animal relationships is an interdisciplinary seminar and also a research group focusing on exploring the complex connections between humans and animals. And our affiliates bring expertise in veterinary medicine, animal cognition, the anthropology of human-animal relationships, interpersonal psychology, and decision making, among other disciplines to this. And through our regular scholarly talks and discussions, our series fosters an important dialogue and on the innovative research that is been conducted in the area of human-animal relationships. Today, I am very excited to present to you today's speaker, Dr. Leslie Irvine. This excitement comes from the fact that Dr. Irvine has dedicated a large part of her career to the study of animals and society and made a very important contribution to the sociology of HAI. And it has been overdue to have Dr. Irvine speak here. Previous talks have focused on the importance of studying the psychology and the anthropology and the mental health benefits of human-animal relationships. And today we have the pleasure of hearing about the sociology of this topic. Dr. Irvine is a professor of sociology emerita at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and she received her Ph.D. from Stony Brook University and focuses a lot on the role of animals in society. She's the author of several books, including My Dog Always Eats First, which examines homeless people's relationships with animal companions. So it's a real pleasure to have you here today, Dr. Irvine. Leslie told me that she prefers questions at the end of her talk, so we have an opportunity to ask after the talk. So the stage is all yours, Leslie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin. Glad for this opportunity to be with you today. As Martin said, I'm the author of several books, including this one, If You Tame Me, Understanding Our Connection with Animals, Filling the Ark, which examined animal welfare in disasters. He mentioned My Dog Always Eats First, Homeless People and Their Animals, also co-authored with two other sociologists regarding animals. And I'm going to touch on some of these in my talk today, and I'll address some other work that I've done. I'm going to be taking a broad sweep rather than a deep dive, but happy to go into any of these other topics in detail later. So just a few of the topics that I've studied: animal abuse, gender in veterinary medicine, animal sheltering, adoption and surrender decisions, and emotion management in shelters, animals in popular culture, and cats on social media. So one of the the obvious starting place for my work is to answer the question, what does sociology have to say about animals? If you have studied sociology, if you have taken any sociology at all, you probably associate sociology with the study of human beings. And that's indeed how the majority of sociology works and how it has worked historically. When I was a graduate student, when I did my master's degree, I thought that I wanted to study my lifelong interest in the meaning of cats for people's lives. And I told my advisor that I wanted to study people's relationships with cats. And this was in 1990. And she said, what other ideas do you have? There was essentially no existing work in sociology that I could build on, use as a foundation, situate a literature within which I could situate my work. So I went on to study people's relationships with other people. And by the time I got my PhD, got a job with tenure, um, two sociologists had written on animals and society, and their book was very well received. So this was in the late 1990s. And so I thought, well, aha, I've got some shoulders, some giants whose shoulders I can stand on at this point. So by the end of the 1990s, there was an opening for the study of animals and society. And I'm proud to say that I was one of the founding members of this section on animals and society when the American Sociological Association decided to recognize the area. Um, in 2002, that was established. In the late 2000s, I was able to create a very popular course on animals and society at the University of Colorado, Boulder, and created a certificate program also that I'll tell you a little bit about later on in the talk. So what can a sociological perspective bring to the study of animals and human beings? Most of you have some degree of exposure to animals and their roles in society. So these points won't be any surprise to you, but we know that pets are in the majority of American homes. This is true of Western Europe as well. In contrast, children are only in 39% of American homes. So we know that there are lots of dogs and cats in American households. And yet, as I'll mention later, we define the family by its human members, or we have up to a point. So some sociologists began to recognize that animals change the constitution of human households. We know that agriculture contributes hugely to our economy in terms of jobs, in terms of dollars. We know that the pet food industry contributes economically, billions and billions of dollars annually. Uh, no surprise to any of you that zoonoses are an important way that humans and animals share a social ecosystem. Animals infiltrate or pepper our language. For example, you've probably been watched like a hawk. You've heard of being mad as a hornet or being a fly on the wall. There's an elephant in the room. There's the wild goose chase. Animals are also part of the earliest human attempts at artwork. Now, this is from the caves in Lascaux, France. We don't know exactly what these cave paintings represent in terms of were they art, were they religion, were they something else, but we know that animals were among the first images that human beings created. I've always had a particular fondness for this chubby little horse image, personally. We know that animals have roles very early in children's lives. They're among the first gifts that children receive. They help children learn to speak. I know so many children I've run across when walking dogs, and they are approaching in a stroller and they point and say, doggy. And their parents often have told me that that was their first word. We know that animals have had roles in our economy as laborers, not only large animals, but smaller animals too. And today they fight wars with us as horses have always done, dogs are now doing. And dogs more recently have roles in disease detection. So let's think about this question. What can a sociological perspective bring to the research on human-animal interaction? What we do in sociology is we study interactions, institutions, and meanings. And the kinds of questions we ask have to do with what happens when humans and animals interact, who holds power, how do institutions organize these relations, and how do people justify and normalize these relations. We are not biologists, we're not animal behaviorists, but we can look at the dynamics of human-animal interactions and understand a bit more about what's going on. So let me begin with interactions. At the risk of being overly pedantic, here's a little definition. Interactions, what I mean is by interactions is relational dynamics, or what happens when human and animals encounter each other in real time. And this is the topic of that book of mine that I showed you earlier in the presentation. Now, here's a pop quiz. You think about what was on the cover. Everybody thinks they saw a dog, and in fact, there was a dog, but bonus points if you also saw the cat. So in this book, I situated the work at an animal shelter, and I began to look at what people did when they said they had a connection with animals. When people chose animals to adopt, whether they were dogs or cats, I asked them, how did you choose this particular animal? And they said, I felt a connection with them. And I thought, okay, so what if we take this idea of a connection seriously? And in sociology, have long been very concerned about anthropomorphism. And so I said, well, what if I figure out how these people define their connections with animals? So I looked at these factors here, including communication, how humans and animals cooperate, how the animals resist, and how trust, fear, and attachment works in human-animal interactions. And what I found in this research was that animals are minded participants in social interaction. That is, they have minds, they have their own emotions, and they're not just symbols, they're not just pieces of the furniture, but they're actually participating so that we co-create. Sorry, that went a little faster than I could talk. So that we co-create social reality. And this recognizes that animals have a sense of agency. People who work with animals know this very well, but in sociology, it was long dismissed as impossible because animals lack the capacity for spoken language. In sociology, the claim was that we couldn't really understand other species because we couldn't know what was going on in their minds. But through those factors such as communication, understanding body language, understanding how people perceive an animal's preferences, wants, needs, fears, delights, that this sense of connection emerges. Now, sociologists also look at institutions. This is defined in a sociological sense as structured systems of power that organize human-animal relations on a large scale. And just to give a couple of examples of what I'm talking about, institutions include agriculture, science and medicine, law, and family. So when I say institutions structure the animal relations within these contexts, here's what I mean. In agriculture, the farmer doesn't simply choose how to treat the animals, but there are industry norms, there are veterinary standards, there are market structures, and these together constitute what counts as care for animals. And the one I'm going to talk about a little bit today is the institution of the family. As I mentioned, the sociological research and lots of other research has always considered the family as its human members. And these views have excluded forms of family that are not that are, sorry, that are not heteronormal and that might come from other racial and ethnic arrangements and from other class necessities. So just to expand on that a little bit, the idea of two parents, one stay-at-home female mother and one working male spouse and their 2.2 kids. It can only exist in the abstract anymore. We don't have the economy and the social structure to support that. Likewise, as I'll argue, that these traditional views of the family are also speciesist. So I argued in my research that family didn't consist of a configuration of individuals, but it was a configuration of meanings, and that a family was the enactment of those meanings within a household. And a noted family researcher, David Morgan, says that family is not a thing, but a way of looking at and describing practices which might also be described in a variety of other ways. For example, what does a family do? Well, a family lives in one household, but not everybody who lives in one household is necessarily family. Not everyone who eats together is necessarily family, but it's a way of that the people who are engaged in those practices describe those relations. For example, animals intervene in households by structuring the time and the routines of everyday life. So the cat who decides it's time for breakfast, so therefore it's time for the human members of the household to wake up. The walk structures lots of everyday routines in many households. Animals also share to greater and lesser degrees human meals. We increasingly celebrate animals or include animals in holiday celebrations, whether it's a birthday or Christmas. There's even some articles on dog bar and bat mitzvahs recently. And animals change the architecture and the structure of the house. And this is my kitchen. I don't have small children, but I do have child-proof locks on the lower doors of the cabinets. And that's because if they're not there, various animals over time will help themselves to the food that's in them. So I developed this notion, this concept, which I refer to as more than human families. And this leaves room for the idea that human members of our families are one aspect of families, and they certainly, I've had discussions and interesting arguments with people who think that I'm saying that a cat's life is as valuable as a human child's life, and that's not what I'm saying. But I am saying in the context of thinking about definitions of families, it's important to recognize the value of non-human animals. And this came into play very strongly in the research I did on animals and disasters. Very 2 years ago, no, sorry, 4 years ago, Colorado had a huge wildfire that became what is called an urban firestorm, which was a new term to me. And I know Arizona has had some of these terrible, terrible wildfires as well. They've gone on in California and other places too. But in the context of a disaster, animals indeed constitute members of the family. And it's important in disaster planning to include them for saving their lives, but also protecting the psychological and emotional welfare of the human members of the family. That third dimension that sociologists study has to do with meanings. And by this, I'm referring to how people justify and interpret their actions. And we do this through various aspects. So we do this through language. We have terms like livestock and pets. We have large and small animals, and that influences the treatment those animals will receive. We have moral narratives. For example, what is regarded as humane treatment of animals. We have cultural categories. We have animals considered wild. We have animals considered domestic. And we have emotional frames. So we can regard some animals as companions or pets and some as pests. And these designations will, as I said, influence the treatment that animals receive. And there's one particular example I'll give you that drives this point home pretty well. And that's the question of what is a mouse? So if you're out on a hike and you encounter a mouse like this little one here, usually no big deal. A field mouse, leave it alone, quite fine, just going about the mouse business of everyday life. But if a mouse turns up in your kitchen, it's a different story. If it's in your bedroom, if it's in the walls of your home, a different story. This changes the designation from a wild animal to a pest. And when an animal becomes a pest, we have cultural, social permission to exterminate them in just about any way that we choose. The issue there is to get rid of them because they've moved from their proper place to the human realm where they're causing some kind of problem to property or human behavior. Now, mice can also, in addition to being wildlife and pests, they can also be pets. And you would, if you had a mouse as a pet, you would not kill them using the same methods, the poison and the trapping, that are easily or readily prescribed for the management of pests. Mice can also be food for other pets. And they're for pets that have to be fed live prey. This is kind of a whopper of a mouse. Usually, or more often, domestic snakes are fed very small mice. But mice can also be research tools. And the same mice that are pests and pets and food cannot also be research tools for reasons some of you probably understand quite well in terms of cell lines and contamination of research samples and so on and so forth. So if one of these research tools, one of these mice gets loose and runs around the building, they can't return to that status as a research tool. I've known some researchers who will take escapees home and convert them into pets for their children, but they can also be, as they call it in research, sacrificed because they no longer have the status of a research tool. Finally, mice can also be symbolic. In this case, they can convey innocence, happiness, nostalgia, and no one would subject Mickey here to the kind of treatment that we would give to a wild animal that got out of place by sneaking into the kitchen. So in sociological thinking, meanings connect to the practices that we associate with animals by making them feel normal, inevitable, and ethical. And I think you can see that with the example of the mouse. There is um, a sense in which the mouse used in the laboratory, the lab mouse or the lab rat, feels normal, whereas to take a pet mouse and confine them in a plastic box would be abnormal and unethical. So I'm going to wind down now by summarizing the main themes. We sociologists treat human-animal interactions as part of social structure, not nature. We're not qualified to talk about biology or animal behavior, but we can look at interactions and see how they're situated within what we refer to as social structure. And this allows us to connect the treatment of animals to other factors such as capitalism, law, science, inequality. We can see how animals don't exist as a separate realm on their own, something that has to be studied separately from other social phenomena, but they are in fact co-actors within those social enterprises. Thirdly, sociology shows how morality operates collectively, not individually, through sets of norms and practices that work at a large scale. And our research shows that our belief in human exceptionalism is a social construction, not a biological fact. And this is probably the strongest obstacle or hurdle that sociologists have had to surpass to study animals, because it was long believed, as I mentioned, that we couldn't have access to animals' minds and feelings. And human beings were the only ones that really mattered. But now we are able to show that it is, in fact, animals who help create, co-constitute the meaning of the social world. So I'd like to open up for questions and I hope some discussion. What I'd like to do before that, though, is just tell you about this certificate program. I created actually two separate programs at the University of Colorado. One is for enrolled students who can complete the certificate, much as they would certificates in other topics like women and gender studies, public health. This is in addition to their major, but I also created an online program that's open to the public through the online platform Coursera. And it's a three-part certificate program that consists of 12 or 15 courses divided among the three units. The lectures are short. I don't think there's any one that's longer than 15 minutes, but they're free. And if you're interested, of course, you can just point the camera at the screen and take a look. For people who would find value in a certificate in a job setting, there is a paid version in which people take a couple of quizzes. And full disclosure, I do make a little bit of money for that, but most importantly, the lectures are free. So if you just want to get a little more sociology, you can take a look here, and you can also pick and choose. You don't have to like trek through the whole program.